Good morning, church. Glad to see you here today, and I hope you are doing well. I know we have some people that are watching that are much further away, and right now it's evening for them, so good evening to you all, and hope you're doing well today, too. I know we have some visitors, and I'm grateful that you could be with us here today. Very thankful that you chose to worship with us. If it's your first time, then we especially want to let you know how much we appreciate you, and hopefully we can get a chance to speak to you before you leave today. What a thrill to be able to worship God together. Our theme for this year has been Jesus First. Jesus First. And we've been exploring for some time the idea of belonging and identity and purpose in Jesus. We're now shifting gears just a little bit, and today what I want us to go into is to explore a little bit about Jesus. I mean, a little deeper than usual. Our title of today's sermon is Jesus Until. And that idea of until will be a factor in what we discuss today. But if you want to go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 15, we're going to be in Luke chapter 15. And you may be there now because it's just what Nathan read to us. Most of our scripture today will be in the Gospel of Luke. But what I would like for us to do is to consider this passage because it's interesting. And if you grew up in the church or if not and you've read the Bible a considerable amount, you might be pretty familiar with this story, the parable of the lost sheep. And that's fantastic. But what I would like for us to do is to maybe go into it just a little bit deeper. When we have that familiarity, it gives us the opportunity to kind of explore it a little bit. And there's two elements of this that I really want us to focus on today. And the idea of until is a big part of that. And also the context in which this passage positions itself is really, really interesting. And if we give ourselves the time and, the opportunity to dive into it a little bit more, maybe what we can pull out of that is a way to express and live our faith a little bit stronger. And maybe there's facets to it that will push us to live our Christianity in a way we may have not thought about before, or at least with a greater intensity. We'd be motivated to do that. Passages like this, I kind of associate it with those moments in which you discover something new about a person you've known for some time. You ever had that moment? You've known someone for a period of time and then you discover some new element and it kind of changes, hopefully for the better, the way that you think about a person. For example, Kathy Dye. Kathy's been going here for some time. I don't know how, but it just kind of hit me the other day. Kathy is an author and writes books. That is fascinating. In fact, she just had a new book come out. That is amazing. And I absolutely love and appreciate those kind of moments. Matt McDowell. There was a day I think Matt and I were either playing disc golf or we were hiking or something. We were just talking and I thought, I kind of know Matt McDowell. And somehow just out of the blue, he drops that he flies, he knows how to fly an airplane. What? That is not a thing you just drop on someone, Matt. Tell me, why do you know how to fly an airplane? And so that kind of unfolded. That's a fun thing to understand. Jim Hall, you may know, plays music. You may know that he loves music a tremendous amount. I will never forget a conversation that I had with Jim Hall in which I think Corrine and the kids were out of town, and so we're just kind of meeting up and talking and visiting. And we talk about music because he knows I love music a lot. And he's like, so, your favorite band's Radiohead? And I was like, yeah, I think so. And I was like, do you like Radiohead? Are they your favorite band? He's like, yeah, I don't like Radiohead. I was like, oh. I said, I think your favorite band's Rush. And he says, do you like Rush? I was like, I can't stand Rush. And then he says, can we still be friends? I was like, I don't know, man. We're going to have to work on it. As you find some interesting things about people, and it's usually for the better, and that's a good thing. And that's what I hope we can do with this passage in Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 7. It's familiar, or at least today I hope it becomes familiar if it's not already. But I also hope we can kind of go into it a little bit deeper. So let's revisit that just for a second. Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 7. In this, verse 1, then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. So we get a setting, we got some people in place. Tax collectors and sinners are drawn near to Jesus. The him is Jesus in this case. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, this man receives sinners and he eats with them. All right, we got our new players into the game, and it's the Pharisees and the scribes, and they're complaining because of the people who are drawing near to Jesus and listening to him. And then Jesus, in verse 3, begins to tell them a parable, and he says this to them. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." Verse 7, "I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance." What an amazing example that Jesus has given in the story of this parable. And on the very surface level in which we are most familiar, we say to ourselves, I get it. One person matters. I get it. Jesus is saying going after people, and that is true. But it's not really the full picture of what we're looking for today, is it? That's true, and that's powerful, and that's very meaningful. And it's one of the reasons why this has been one of the main parables of Jesus that's resonated over the last 2,000 years. But there's more here. And we would cut ourselves short if we don't dive into the little bit more that presents itself. We may cut off some opportunities we have as well. We get that in certain things we do. Have you ever played a sport, maybe your favorite thing with someone, and they kind of get reductive about it and oversimplify it? You play golf and they're like, it's just hitting a ball into a hole, right? If you've played the game and you love the game, no, it's much more than that. Basketball, it's just throwing a rubber ball in a metal hoop. That's it, right? I mean, no, it's not. Riding a skateboard, that's just rolling around on a stick, isn't it? No, it's not. It's absolutely not. How many skateboarders do we have here? Right, the most relevant illustration I could have given, none. Well, I was, whatever. But these stories aren't just that. There's more to it. It's not just going looking for a sheep. There's more details to it. And if you've experienced that, whether you were the lost sheep or you've experienced that because you were the shepherd who went looking, you realize you can't just reduce it down to something so simple. There's more. And Jesus gives us those details. And so we go a little bit deeper and we see some details. Jesus went looking for that sheep. He took the initiative. And given the situation that he's presented by the scribes and the Pharisees, that he's with tax collectors and sinners, they've devalued those lost sheep in many ways. But Jesus, when he considers it, he's going after it until he finds it. Until becomes a critical word in this particular parable. It might be one that we overlook really easy because we're so focused on the finding it, but the intensity and the passion that he gives to the looking is pretty important. He looks until he finds it. That's a challenge to us, isn't it? Because he didn't say that he looked until it was convenient for him and then he stopped. It didn't say that he looked until it started mattering to him and then it didn't matter and so then he stopped. It didn't say anything that he only looked because it was something he related with, and in terms of people, they look like me. And that's certainly where the scribes and the Pharisees would be coming from in this, because they were casting aside the tax collectors and the sinners. The value that they had for them wasn't very great, to the degree that they were complaining about them, that Jesus would even give them any time. But Jesus is saying, I'm going to go look for the lost until I find them. They'll be afforded a great degree of attention. On top of that, it's not just that he finds it. Look what he does next. I mean, that in and of itself is amazing. But Jesus goes a little deeper into it in this parable, not just the intensity and the motivation he has for looking for it, but the love and compassion that he gives. When he finds the one that is lost, he picks it up, he lays it on his shoulders, and he carries it. He carries it. And easy, and if you expand the story too much, you can say, it's got legs, it can walk. It's the one that wandered off, and it's its fault. It should walk back. And you get into this thing where you're attacking the one that's lost, and you're beating it down. This is not what Jesus is doing. In a loving way, he's picking it up and says, I'll carry it. I'll carry it as well. And on top of that, it wasn't just that he was carrying it and supporting it and taking it to where it belongs. It says he rejoiced in the midst of it. He's giving us a motivation and intensity. He's getting us a degree of love and care that's reflected in actions. And he's showing his attitude in the midst of this, which was to rejoice in the midst of it. And he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. When he gets back, it's not just that he returns it and that's the end of the story. No, it's so important to him that he calls his friends and his neighbors and asks them to come and rejoice with him. And so what we have is the celebration of a community of people and the success of the return of the one that is lost. Well, that's a different factor entirely than just, hey, he finds a sheep. He just finds a sheep. And we know that matters because Jesus is giving this parable for an instructive reason. He means that the person that listens to us, which is, yes, the audience that he had back then, but also those of us today, need to take this on in an instructive way. If that's what it meant for Jesus in demonstrating that, the same thing needs to apply to us. We have to take ownership of this. And if we find ourselves saying, well, really, do I? I mean, it's just finding something that's lost, not a big deal. Then maybe we need to address how much we actually care. Maybe we need to address how much did we actually participate in the process. Because if it doesn't feel familiar to us, or we reject it so easily, or we get reductive about it, maybe it's not as much a part of our lives as it should be. And with Jesus, this is everything, isn't it? Didn't Jesus say that he came to seek and save the lost? Yes. Didn't Jesus come down to give his time so that we would know exactly what it meant to follow God and obey God? And he did that with everything. He gave everything in the midst of this. So yes, it is very instructive. Not just on the surface level of go find something that's lost, but the motivation and the care and the love, the sacrifice, the using your own strength, the rejoicing in the midst of it, the calling the community together and sharing in the victory, it all becomes very, very significant. And you do this until you find it. That is a different message entirely. That's showing many facets of the parable that exist and the way that Jesus is expecting us, calling us to participate in the same kind of behavior, with the same degree of love, with the same measure of sacrifice. It's a challenge. And as his people, it's one that when we hear it, we say, yes, let me be on board with that as well. Yes, let us rejoice in the returning of the lost as well. Yes, let us go out and participate and celebrate those things together. A little bit deeper. But it's all that word until. And the expansiveness until kind of grows as we go a little bit deeper into the story. Yes, he looked until he found it. That's significant. Don't stop. Don't close those doors. But let's look at the full context of the story. And until becomes a little bit deeper here, a little bit bigger. Sometimes when we read this story, we just block it off to those 7 verses, or even maybe from verses 4 on to 7, because that's the thrust of it. But it gets a bit bigger when we go back and look at the full picture of who Jesus is talking to. In fact, when we begin looking at all the people that are surrounding Jesus in the moment, we do have a much bigger image to think about until. And Jesus' participation into the idea of until, because it's not just the tax collectors and not just the sinners that he's going out and looking. It's also the people that are complaining about him as well. The problem is, they didn't view themselves as the lost sheep. But when we look at the bigger picture of what's going on with the scribes and Pharisees in just the Gospel of Luke alone, we might consider they might be the lost sheep, really. I mean, you've got a history. You've got a long history of interactions between them and Jesus that is not respectful, that is not reverent, that is not honoring him as the Son of God. In fact, it's contentious. It's oppositional. To say that they complain in 15 really doesn't sum up the history they've had with Jesus up until this point. And understand that these were also Hebrew people. These are also Jewish people who should have been God's people. And whatever God's plan should be, then they of all people should be the ones upholding it, celebrating it, participating in it. They're religious leaders who are rejecting it, turning their back on it, and trying to find cause to lead Jesus to fail in his mission to seek and save the lost. But that word until, he's going to include even them in the situation, even the ones who oppose him. In Luke chapter 5, if you just glance at that real quick, you can see there's 3 separate occasions in those short period of time, those short verses, in which they are opposing the works of Jesus. And when we get to Luke chapter 6, we see that there's even, particularly 6 through 11, there's a man who's suffering from dropsy, and Jesus heals him. But because it's on the Sabbath, they lose their minds. Why would you do that, Jesus? It's the Sabbath. And when he has opposition with them because his disciples don't fast like they do, and because they pick grain in a way that is opposed to the traditions and the preferences of the Pharisees and the scribes, they find occasion to oppose Jesus. But in that, in Luke chapter 6, verses 6 through 11, you can find the ending of it really reveals their attitude. And it's quite a contrast to the rejoicing and the joy and the celebration of community that you see Jesus giving in the parable. And it makes us go, oh, he gave that description very, very deliberately. It's instructive for them as well. After he had healed the man, look in verse 11 of chapter 6, they were filled with rage. Not just displeasure, they were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. So oppositional. But this is the plan of God, that Jesus would come. And as people of God, they should be upholding it, but they've turned themselves so deeply opposed to Jesus, so deeply against Jesus, that they can't recognize that they are also the lost sheep that Jesus is looking at. And it doesn't stop. He keeps giving them these opportunities. They were the audience of that parable, and they're complaining. Sure, the tax collectors and the sinners, they needed to know they were lost, but Jesus cared, and he's helping them help them be saved. But also the Pharisees and the scribes. And I find that amazing. Think about someone who's opposed you. Or what if there was someone who opposed you? How many times would they begin opposing you and talking bad about you, plotting against you, reviling you, shutting you down, before that temptation creeps in? You're like, I'm done with those people. Before the temptation to badmouth them starts coming out. Before you start trying to drive them into the ground. As humans, that temptation might rise up. In fact, you might be facing it right now. But with Jesus, he wasn't approving of what they were doing, but he was still giving them this moment in Luke chapter 15, verses 1 through 7, by giving this parable, demonstrating that he was looking after the lost sheep until they would be found as well. You ever think about that? Maybe the reason that he points out the issues with the scribes and Pharisees is so that they would repent, so that they could turn around and come back as well. That Jesus loves those people to such a degree that even the ones opposing him, he would go looking for them, that they might also have forgiveness until they could be found. Until they could be found. Man, that's a much more intense level of seeking and saving the lost than we read just on the surface of go look for lost sheep. It's even these people. And even after this, they would still oppose him. Luke chapter 18, when we look at it in the bigger context of this, and we see how that's driving along from Luke 5 on, even in Luke 18, very famous parable there as well. Beginning in verse 9, it's the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And it was the pride of the Pharisee that was holding him back, and viewing himself as self-righteous, he had blinded himself to seeing how lost he was in the moment. But it was the tax collector, the sinner they're complaining about in chapter 15, who had humbled himself, couldn't even look up into heaven. And Luke chapter 20 and verse 20, they're so still set against Jesus that they have people pretend to be righteous so they can go and trap him in a question about owing taxes to Caesar. Obviously, Jesus navigates those things exactly in the right way, exactly in truth, with the right level of compassion. But with this parable in Luke 15, verses 1 through 7, we see that he's trying to give them an opportunity to be found. In many ways, this lesson directed at them is him calling out to the lost to turn away, to start reflecting on and considering whether you're lost or not. It's so generous of Jesus, so generous, that even when we see him on the cross, and he looks down at all those people that lied about him and beat him and turned on him and rejected him, yeah, even the Pharisees and the scribes and the chief priests and the people, the religious leaders that should have been championing him and protecting him and worshiping him, he still looks at them, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, that's instructive for us. It's not just about going out and looking for the lost sheep who are convenient, that are easy, that matter to us, that look like us, that fit our preferences. It's to all of them. And with Jesus, it was even the ones that opposed him to the point leading to his death and unjust trial. That's a big picture that we've got there, a big challenge. But you know what? It's not a burden. It's not a burden. We say, well, if Jesus expects that to do, I don't know if I can do that. But the reason he put this in the Gospels, the Holy Spirit recorded this in the Gospels, is yes, you absolutely can do this. You absolutely can do this because you're not doing it alone. You are doing it with God. You are doing it with your church. And let me tell you right now, whether you are the lost sheep who needs to call out because you need saving, or if you are the shepherd position to where you're supposed to be going, you are given instruction, you are given motivation, you are given a demonstration of it. We see that in Jesus. And let me tell you right now, there's people that need you to be looking. They need you. And Jesus is inviting us to participate in that with him until you and me find them. Until we find them. Now, we can look at that and go like, I don't know if I signed up for that today. But by becoming a Christian, by being a follower of Jesus, we don't get the passive play in this. In fact, we get the privilege to participate. And let me tell you, there's amazing things that are happening in that. Even with the scribes and the Pharisees, Jesus was calling at them, looking for them to be saved, and some were. I mean, can you imagine Nicodemus, a Pharisee? He appeared to Jesus in John chapter 3, John 7, and John chapter 19. 19, he's there participating in the burial of Jesus. Even though he might have caught a lot of flack and condemnation for the other Pharisees from that, he was there participating. Joseph of Arimathea, not sure if he was absolutely a Pharisee, but he was in the Sanhedrin, and he was there, a religious leader, giving his grave for Jesus to be buried in and being very public about it by going to Pontius Pilate and requesting the body of Jesus. You're not hiding that. That's out in the forefront of it. He became a follower. And let's not forget Paul, Saul of Tarsus at one point. But if you recall in Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, as he's describing his credentials and his background and his histories, he said concerning the law, a Pharisee. He had that association, even if it's just a metaphor for his dedication. And perhaps he was on track to be a Pharisee in many ways. But even having that dedication, Jesus still reached out to him on that road to Damascus. And he kept with him until he converted and became a Christian. Victory. And that's written in the Gospels, and that's written in the history of the church, that there's these moments of incredible success that move the church. And we too get to participate in that. What a privilege to be able to do that. So it's instructive. It's very, very instructive, especially in the sense that he calls us to do the same thing, to be a shepherd, to follow after him, to go out and seek and save the lost. All right, so how do we do that? First of all, don't be like the scribes and the Pharisees in this regard. To disregard people. Their complaint was that these sinners and these tax collectors were going to hear Jesus. And they were listening to him. Now, that was what was happening. They were going to hear Jesus. And Jesus, claiming to be a religious leader from their standpoint, would entertain these sinners, dismissive about him. Which means they didn't view these people as worthwhile. Their focus was not on what the sinners and the tax collectors needed. They were not concerned about what the tax collectors and the sinners, who they could become because of Jesus and in following God. They were very short-sighted. They were locked into their preferences. We're interested in this kind of person. A person that was reflective of the worldly standards of religious values. Sure, we'll uphold them. The kind of people that would dress the way the Pharisees would, yeah, we'll care about them. The kind of people that would speak very similar or look similar, those are the preferences they would get locked into. And let me tell you, that is a trap. When we start trying to dictate our preferences and force that onto what we should be doing as a Christian as opposed to what God expects us to do, that is a trap, and that will lead us further and further and further away from Jesus. Perhaps even to the point, if we're not careful, where we might too then become a lost sheep. We want no part of that. Instead, when we see that there is a need in someone's spiritual life, even though they don't look like us, even though they come from a very difficult background, even though they might not dress like us or sound like us or use the same phrases as we do, we can't close that door. We cannot close that door. We attend to that need because we're Jesus' people. And we see people, we can't lock them into who they are at that moment. We need to start seeing who they can become because of Jesus. Why? Because we're Jesus' people. And he did that for us. And so we get to do that for others and show them the gospel. Of course. Why would we hesitate? And we may say, well, David, do you not know this person had a needle in his arm with an illegal drug last week? Okay, that's a struggle. I mean, that's pretty intense. But if they love the Lord and they're wanting to turn out of that, how can we help them? And how can we go at them with an intensity and a love and lift them up and put them on our shoulders and carry? And if they convert, how can we rejoice and call the community of believers together to do so? You're saying that's a hyper-specific example you're giving there, David. It is. I got a phone call last week from a guy, and we had helped them get a baptistry, and he called to thank us for that baptistry because they've had 21 baptisms since December. A huge chunk of those were people that were former addicts, and they were people who had really struggled. That congregation, which is in Ohio, they didn't close the door. They didn't look down on people. They saw that people had a need. They saw that they could become something greater in Christ Jesus. And they knew that even though they had addictions, those could be overcome. They knew they had struggles in life, those can be overcome. And so he was calling to thank us for supporting them in that way. He was calling to share and celebrate that the lost had been found, that there had been victory. I mean, what a fantastic thing. You could hear it in his voice in the midst of that. Why would we not celebrate? And that's people, humans, let's make sure we view it that way, not objects and not projects. That's people with souls who a lot of people say, that's less than, that's not worth their time. But it was worth their time. It's worth Jesus' time. And victory took place. It wasn't a pulling back and a retreat. There was a going forth and converting and sharing the gospel and let it do its work. Does everyone convert? Nope. God gave us free will. And some people will reject. That doesn't mean we shirk our responsibilities to take the gospel out there so that Jesus can change people's lives. Fantastic. Fantastic. So what is the take-home from this today? What's the take-home? You can impact people's lives. That's one take-home. Even in ways that may seem a little bit passive. For example, a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, I'd brought up the fact that there was a congregation, there was a guy, I know a preacher and a guy, and he was trying to start a golf program for middle schoolers, and I'm 100% supportive of that. It's not my sport, irrelevant. There was a need. And there was a way that he's so good at connecting people to the church. I mean, like exceptionally good at connecting the people to the church. And I know that's what's going to happen. And so I'd asked you all, if you have extra stuff, could you help in that? And you did. I mean, you really, really did, generously. And I was telling Susie about that this morning, is when I was taking the stuff down there, I have no reference point. I mean, I recognize a few things. That says Titleist. I've heard of that. I've seen a commercial. But I don't know what it was. And we got down there and pulled it out. It was just a lot of stuff. And he's like, wow, this is amazing stuff. And I know who can use this. And I know how they can use it. And if I can get them to come to church, it's where exactly he went. Yeah, I'm going to support this kid and thank you for your generosity. I mean, look, really thank you. He sent that intently. But I'm going to connect them to church. And we're going to teach them golf, but I'm going to connect them to church. You participated in that. So you could do at least that and more, right? And more. Right now, what I hope you to do, and if you're not doing it, I hope you will, you might be thinking about a person that you know is lost or struggling or close to being lost. You might have two people. That's okay too. I really want to challenge you to think about that person, and I want you to think about the word until. And I really want you to think about the intensity and the love and the compassion that Jesus put into the lost. And if there's even a mild temptation to think, but they're like the tax collectors, but they're like the sinners, they're like the less desirables, put that out of your mind. It doesn't belong in our minds as Christians, and it certainly doesn't belong in our hearts. Certainly not what Jesus demonstrated. Pray for that person. Love that person. Give to that person. Lift them up. Lift them up. And when the opportunity comes to show them Jesus, do so in a loving way, in a compelling way that shows them that there is a path in which they can give whatever sin up, that Jesus can deal with it. And they may say, no, I'm not good enough. Well, it's not about that. You're not so bad ever that Jesus can't handle it. You're just not. And I know people wrestle with that. But they need your love, and they need to see Jesus' love through you. I hope you've got that person in mind. I hope on top of that you'll have a determination to love that person and share the gospel with them until they are found. And you say, well, that may take years. Maybe. Maybe. And you may be thinking, well, I've been doing that, and I'm on the verge of giving up. Don't give up. Do not give up. Never close the door. It may be that you need to step away for a time, but never close that door. People will surprise you sometimes. They really, really will. But they need you. They may not even realize it. They definitely need Jesus, but you get to participate. Right now, you may be thinking, even of someone who used to go to our congregation, but they've drifted away, and maybe there's no real contentious element, they just drifted away, and they need you. They need a hand to say, hey, I love you and I care about you. I'm willing to lift you up. I'm not here to beat you down. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to push you away. I just want you to know how much you are loved. You can do that. And you can do it together. And when we get those victories, we'll celebrate those together as a community, just like in the parable. And then we'll say, okay, great. Who's next? Who's next? It's a big world. And all the time we're hearing about how dark it's getting and how evil it's getting. And that may make us think, oh, we better pull it inside a little bit. We're going to talk about circle the wagons tonight. I hope you're here for that. Sometimes you do circle the wagons. And sometimes you go out and say, nope, you will not close us up. God is light. He's asked us to be light. We will only go out into the world and be His light. We will be determined to go out and seek and save the lost, just like Jesus, until you find them. Deliberately use the word you because it's every single one of us to be involved in that as a church community. We'll take it on, and we'll be grateful for God for allowing us to do that. Today, you may realize that you are one of the lost. I hope in the midst of this, you recognize that we don't say that as a way to put you down. We really do not. We say it as a way to say, listen to the invitation of Jesus. He wants you to be saved. He's done everything possible to give you that opportunity. He's done everything possible to show you exactly what it takes to do that. And He's given you this moment now in which you can cast aside your sin, or the guilt of the sin. And if it's a thing that you're going to wrestle with a while, do it with people who's going to hold your hand and hug you and love you and be there with you through it. You will not be perfect before you are a Christian. And when you go into Christianity, I know a lot of the world thinks, oh, you think you're perfect people. Nope. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to wrestle with things, but you're going to do it in the direction of God. And He will be just to forgive you when you repent. And Jesus' blood will wash away your sins. It's absolutely the best life you could possibly live. It's freedom. It's freedom. The point is, you don't have to be lost. You can choose to do something about it today. Know that you're loved. Know that there's an answer. And know that we'll be with you in whatever way we can. Absolutely will be. Today, if there's a need that we can serve you in, if there's a way that we can help you, let us know as we stand and as we sing.